Welcome to Ghosts of Asia, where the living are not alone, and the silence you hear might be someone listening back. In this haunted corner of the world, shadows cling to concrete walls, ancient rituals bleed into modern life, and the dead do not rest simply because the living forget them. Here, urban legends aren't just whispers. They echo through apartment vents. They press against elevator doors. They breathe behind you when you're alone. Tonight, we take you deep into the heart of Ho Chi Minh City, into a building that was supposed to be ordinary, where one woman moved in seeking quiet and instead awakened something that was never meant to rise. This is not just a ghost story. This is a warning, because once you hear the pacing, once you hear the chanting, it might already be too late. This is The Tenant Below Never Sleeps. When Min moved into Unit 8C, she told herself it was only temporary, just until things calmed down, just until she could breathe again. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and forgotten incense. Ho Chi Minh City was always humming, a city that never truly slept. But here, on the 8th floor of a faded concrete apartment block, it was unusually quiet, almost reverent. Min stepped out of the rusted elevator with her single suitcase and a box of books cradled in her arms. Her shoulders ached. Her eyes stung from crying the night before. She hadn't told anyone she was moving, not her mother, not her friends, definitely not him. The door to Unit 8C opened too easily. The landlord had warned her the lock stuck sometimes, but today it turned without resistance. The first thing she noticed was the smell, or the lack of it. No dust, no mildew, no trace of the previous tenant. The room was immaculate, polished wood floors, pale walls without a single crock. It looked sterilized. Min stepped through each room, the narrow kitchen with its spotless sink, the tiny bathroom that gleamed like it had never seen mold, and the bedroom where sunlight cut clean lines across the empty space. She pressed her hand to the wall, cold. Not surprising, it was January, and the city still hadn't warmed. There was nothing wrong with the apartment, but it felt like a room that didn't want to be touched. That first night, Min couldn't sleep. She lay on the unfamiliar mattress with a borrowed blanket tucked to her chin, staring at the dark ceiling. The ticking of the old wall clock was sharp, intrusive, echoing through the otherwise still apartment. And then she heard it. Faint at first, like the sound of someone dragging furniture. A scraping, dragging sound, soft but deliberate, directly below her. She sat up, listening. Then came the footsteps. Not hurried, not heavy, just slow, deliberate pacing. 1, 2, 3, back and forth across the unit beneath hers. She frowned. Her landlord had said the building was quiet, only 4 units per floor. She didn't remember seeing anyone else when she moved in. She tried to go back to sleep, chalking it up to a restless neighbor. The next morning, she heard nothing. No voices, no movement, just the low buzz of traffic far below her window and the drone of city heat pressing in. Min brushed it off. That night, it happened again. Same time, just past 3 a.m., dragging furniture. Pacing footsteps. Then something new, a soft, rhythmic sound, like whispering. She couldn't make out the words, but it repeated in a steady pulse, like a prayer or chant. She pressed her ear to the floor. The sound stopped. A second passed. Then something tapped back. Just once. Min jerked away from the floor, heart thudding. "It's just my imagination," she whispered. "Just creaky floors, thin walls." But the apartment was too clean to creak, too new to groan. She didn't sleep again. On the third day, she decided to ask about it. Mr. Bao, the landlord, was an older man with neatly combed gray hair and a permanent frown. He lived on the ground floor, in a unit that doubled as an office and a shrine to his deceased wife. "Excuse me," Min began, her voice softer than usual. "I've been hearing noises from the apartment below mine, Unit 7C, I think, at night. It's pretty constant." Bao looked up from his tea. His expression didn't change, but his hands stilled. 7C, he said slowly. "Yes, scraping, footsteps, maybe someone praying. I just wanted to know if—" "There is no one in 7C, he interrupted. "Oh, maybe someone just moved in?" His face darkened. "No one has lived in that unit since the fire." She waited, expecting more. Instead, he stood. "Don't go near it." That was all he said. Then he closed the door. Min didn't want to be the type of person who snoops, but fear is a strange thing. It makes you curious, makes you reckless. That night, she tiptoed down to the 7th floor. The hallway lights flickered once before stabilizing. The air smelled different, like soot and something metallic, faint but present. The door to Unit 7C looked like it had been burned in place, blackened, warped. The doorknob had melted down the side like wax. The number was barely visible, half of the metal plaque peeled away. No one could live here. She reached out instinctively, and then froze. The air around the door was cold, freezing compared to the humid warmth of the hallway. Her fingertips tingled. The door was sealed shut with some kind of dark resin, maybe concrete, maybe something older. She stepped back, heart pounding. Something shifted inside. Not movement, more like a presence. Like the air on the other side of the door breathed in just as she breathed out. She fled upstairs. That night, she dragged her mattress to the far corner of the room, away from the mysterious floor sounds. But it didn't help, because now the footsteps had changed direction. They paced toward her, always stopping beneath her bed, always at 3:17 a.m. That night, she didn't sleep at all. She watched the clock tick forward, her hands clutching the blanket like a child. The moment the minute hand hit 3:17, the lights flickered. A wind rose in the sealed apartment. Her phone lit up with no notification. And then she heard it again. The whispering. But this time, she recognized the voice. It was hers, screaming from beneath the floor. Men didn't leave her apartment for 2 days. She barely ate. She barely moved. Her thoughts circled the same image again and again. The melted door of 7C, the tap from beneath the floor, and that whisper, her own voice echoing back to her in screams she didn't remember making. She kept the lights on, all of them, even in the bathroom. Her mattress stayed in the corner of the room, as far from the strange patch of floor as possible. But nothing helped, because even during the day, when the city roared outside and sunlight touched her window, the apartment remained cold, still, watchful, like it had eyes. She decided she needed proof, something she could show someone, something she could use to prove she wasn't going insane. She grabbed her phone, knelt by the floor, and hit record. It was almost 2 a.m. She whispered into the mic, "Tell me who you are." Silence. Then, faintly, came the sound of dragging, a wooden chair, or maybe a heavy table. Then, footsteps. And finally, just before she stopped the recording, a low murmur, like breath on glass. She jerked her hand away. The next morning, she opened the file. Corrupted. Her stomach turned cold. She tried again the following night, placing the phone directly on the floor while she stayed in the kitchen. When she retrieved it in the morning, the file had a name she didn't remember giving it. It simply read, "Stop." She played it. All she heard was static until the final 3 seconds. A whisper. "Stop walking so loudly. You're waking me up." Min's breath caught. She stared at the floor. Nothing moved. The wood planks looked solid, untouched, but she couldn't unhear it. The voice had come from just below, a voice that sounded tired, angry, not hers, and not quite human. That afternoon, Min returned to Mr. Bao's office downstairs. He didn't look surprised to see her. "I told you not to go near it," he muttered. "What happened in 7C?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He hesitated. His eyes flicked toward the tiny ancestral altar tucked behind his desk. "There was a fire," he said finally. "5 years ago. It started in the kitchen. That's what the police report said." "Was anyone hurt?" A long pause. "The tenant died. Young woman, Vietnamese Chinese, lived alone. Her name was Lei." "What caused the fire?" "They never found out. It didn't spread, just burned through that apartment. The hallway, the walls, untouched. Only 7C. Only her." Min swallowed. "Do you have the floor plans?" Bao raised an eyebrow. "What for?" I want to understand how the sound carries. I keep hearing—" He cut her off. "You're not hearing her. You're disturbing her." That made Min shiver. He reached behind his desk and pulled out a dusty folder. She flipped through it quickly, skimming the outlines of each unit. Then she paused. Unit 8C, her unit, directly above 7C, as expected. But there was something strange in the plans. A note, handwritten in faded ink, beside 7C's outline. "Do not reopen. Floor sealed twice. Ritual incomplete." She blinked. "What does this mean?" Bao took the folder from her, snapped it shut, and turned away. "Go home, Miss Min. Sleep with the lights off. Say nothing. Listen less." She left, but she couldn't forget what she saw. Ritual incomplete. What ritual? And why was her apartment directly above it? That night, Min couldn't take it anymore. She pulled out her laptop and searched everything she could about fires in District 4, about rituals, about anything tied to the name Lei. Most articles had been archived, but she found one small report, buried in a local blog, about a fire on Vo Van Kiet Street. A young woman was found dead in Unit 7C. Neighbors reported strange smells for days before the fire. Incense, smoke, burned hair. One witness described seeing shadows flicker beneath her door for hours before the flames started, even though the lights were off. The article ended with a quote. "They said she called something, and then she couldn't send it back." Min didn't remember falling asleep, but she dreamed of the hallway. Not just hers, but older, dimmer. The walls were damp and cracked, the doors swollen with moisture. She stood in front of 7C. The number plate had fallen off. The door opened. Inside was a room bathed in candlelight, covered in red string, mirrors, and bowls filled with black water. At the center stood a woman, back facing her, dressed in a torn white aojai. Her hair was too long. It brushed the floor. Her hands were bound by rope. Her mouth moved in slow, unnatural shapes. She wanted to run, but she couldn't move. The woman turned. Her face was blurred, like someone had smudged oil over her features, but she felt recognition. "She's wearing my face." Min jolted awake, soaked in sweat, heart racing. She looked at the clock. 3:17 a.m. The lights were off, and the footsteps had started again. The next morning, Min did what she told herself she wouldn't. She went back to 7C. She brought incense and salt, not because she believed it would help, but because fear makes you superstitious. She knelt outside the burned door and whispered apologies. She didn't know why. Then she heard something from behind the door. A voice, ragged, breathing. It didn't say anything. It just breathed, like it had been waiting. Suddenly the incense in her hand flared, then snapped in half. She dropped it, heart pounding, and ran back upstairs. She locked the door, pulled the curtains, sat on the floor, shaking. The lights flickered again. When she opened her phone camera, just to feel less alone, she noticed something behind her in the reflection of the black TV screen. Not a shape, just movement, just pacing, back and forth, right above the cracked section of her floor. Men stopped sleeping altogether. She searched for anyone who had lived here before. Online forums, tenant history. She found a comment from a user named Tom who once lived in 8B, right beside her unit. Tom's post was simple. I moved out because I kept hearing someone crying through the walls. The landlord told me I was imagining it. I'm not. If you live near 8C, get out now. The post was 6 months old. There was no reply. 3 days passed. Min called her mother just to hear a familiar voice. But when her mother answered, the connection was full of static. Min spoke, but her mother didn't respond. Then someone whispered on the line, "Don't tell her. She can't help you now." The line went dead. Her phone refused to restart for an hour afterwards. When it did, all her call logs from the past week were gone. The night woes. Min woke to find her mattress had shifted. It had moved 3 inches closer to the crack in the floor. She hadn't moved it. Her nails were dirty, packed with something dark. She didn't remember scratching anything. Her shirt smelled of smoke. When she turned to the wall, she found a word written in faint soot. Open. Not scratched, not written with fingers. It looked breathed on. She backed away. The floor beneath her creaked, not like wood shifting, but like pressure building, like something underneath was pushing upward, stretching the planks. The corner of the crack widened by a hair. Min stared down at it, and for a split second, she saw something on the other side. A face, looking up at her, but not blinking, just waiting.
Min stopped stepping on that part of the floor. Every morning, she would trace a careful path around the growing crack, as if proximity alone could invite something through. But the truth was, it didn't matter where she walked, because now the voices followed her. Not just at 3:17 a.m., not just in the dark, but in daylight, in the sound of running water, in the hum of her refrigerator, in the soft scratch of her own breath. Whispers curled behind every ordinary sound, threading themselves into her day like veins of rot beneath fresh paint. She started to wear her headphones constantly, no music, just silence to block them out. It didn't help, because sometimes she heard her name, Min, drawn out, not whispered but exhaled, like something learning how to speak again. On the 4th night, she caught herself muttering under her breath, over and over, the same phrase, "Stay below, stay asleep, stay below, stay asleep." She didn't know where she'd learned it. It felt more like remembering. She stood in the middle of the kitchen, dazed. Her lips moved on their own. Her fingers twitched like she'd been tracing symbols in the air. On the counter, drawn in spilled rice grains, was a pattern she didn't recognize, a spiral, broken by a cross. She blinked, wiped it away, and backed out of the room. She didn't go back in until morning. That day, she visited the temple near Bentang Market. It was the closest place she could think of. She told herself it was for clarity, for peace, for protection. She wandered through the smoke and brass and quiet prayers until she found an old monk lighting incense alone. He didn't look at her. She sat across from him. "What do you do," she said, "when something from the other side starts to follow you?" The monk continued lighting sticks, one by one. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "they don't follow. They remember. And remembering is worse." Min's fingers tightened around the fabric of her bag. "How do you stop it?" "You can't. You can only choose what you give it." "Give it?" He looked up at her, eyes clear and ancient. "If it wakes, it will ask. Don't answer." "And if I already did?" "Then pray it forgets again." He turned away. Min left without lighting incense. She tried calling her mother again. This time, the phone didn't even ring. Instead, the screen flashed black, just for a second, and when it came back on, her lock screen image had changed. It was no longer the picture of her and her sister on the Mekong. It was a photo she didn't recognize, a close-up of the crack in her floor. Taken from above, in the photo, there was something visible inside the gap. Not quite a face, just the hint of one. Eye sockets too wide, skin too pale, a smile that stretched wrong. She dropped the phone and screamed. The screen went dark. When she turned it back on, the image was gone. That night, she didn't try to sleep. She placed her phone on the floor again, this time with a video recording. She wrapped it in her hoodie, pressed it flat to the planks, and whispered, "Talk to me." Then she turned off the lights, crawled to the far corner, and waited. At 3:17 a.m., the temperature dropped. Not metaphorically, literally. The air grew cold enough to fog her breath. The pacing began, but slower this time, more deliberate, as if it knew she was listening. Then came the scraping, not furniture anymore, but something sharp being dragged against the wood from beneath. And then, the voice. Louder, closer, clear. "Don't walk so loudly. You're waking me up." Min clamped her mouth shut, because now the footsteps were not just below, they were on her floor, pacing. She didn't move, didn't breathe. She stared into the dark, heart hammering. A shape passed by the window, brief, slender, like someone standing just outside, watching. But she was 8 floors up. The next morning, she opened the video. It was completely black. The audio was garbled. Except for the final 5 seconds, a woman's voice, sharp and broken. "He used my mouth. He used my name. He left the door open." And then the file cut. Min stared at the screen, frozen. Who is he? What door? And why did it feel like she was the one being blamed? Min began researching spiritual rituals, Vietnamese exorcisms, mediumship, traditional burial rites. She stumbled across obscure references to something called the Loi Ve Nguk, the reverse path, a forbidden mourning rite meant to call the dead backwards through memories instead of time. She found newts on online forums, urban legends. Mediums who tried it often lost their own voice or their face. Some said they went mad, others simply vanished, but people still heard them for years afterward. Lei, that name kept surfacing, sometimes written in all caps, sometimes scratched into the margins of ritual books. The phrase repeated again and again. Lei opened the door. Lei didn't close it. Min slammed her laptop shut. Outside her window, wind knocked something off the balcony railing. She rushed over to look. A dead bird, neck twisted. Its feet were bound by red string. The building's security office was on the ground floor, just behind the mailboxes. She'd passed it 100 times without noticing it was rarely staffed. That day, she waited until someone buzzed her in, and she asked, the guard, an older man with half-lit eyes and incense behind his desk, "Do you have CCTV from the 7th floor?" He hesitated. "Why?" "I think someone's getting into 7C. He didn't respond, just stood, pulled the key under the counter, and led her to the back. There was one monitor. He scrolled through the past 3 nights at 3:17. The footage was grainy, dull colors, no sound. Min leaned forward, heart pounding. The camera faced the corridor. Unit 7C sat dead center. Nothing moved, until a shape stepped into view. It emerged from the wall, or maybe just from nowhere. Pale, still, female, wearing a white dress that clung to her body like wet cloth. She didn't walk, she slid. At exactly 3:17, she turned and looked up, directly at the camera. Min stepped back. "Who has access to that floor?" she whispered. "No one," the guard said. "That unit was sealed after the fire." He paused. "But I've seen her there before." Min turned to him. "You have?" He didn't meet her eyes. "Everyone hears her eventually. Only some answer back." That night, Min left her phone recording again, but this time she played a question into it first. "Who are you?" She let it run. In the morning, the video was black again, but this time the response was longer. A soft voice, sad, exhausted. "You're in my bed. You wear my skin. You stole my name." The voice cracked into static. Then it said, "You were supposed to keep me asleep." Min dropped the phone. The corner of the crack in the floor had shifted again. Now it wasn't a line, it was a mouth. Not open, not speaking, just smiling, waiting. Min no longer felt alone in her own body. It began with her hands. She'd catch them moving before she intended to, reaching for things she didn't want, tracing marks into fogged mirrors. One night, she woke up standing in the kitchen, holding a knife, with no memory of how she got there. The knife wasn't pointed outward. It was resting gently at her own neck. She dropped it, shaking. Something had taken root in her, and it was growing. She began dreaming of fire. Every time she closed her eyes, she stood in a room that burned in slow motion. Smoke curled along the ceiling, but never touched her. Ash clung to her arms like lace. Furniture melted, mirrors cracked, and always at the center was the same figure. A woman in a white dress, hair hiding her face, feet blackened, fingers too long. She whispered in a language Min didn't know, but she understood it anyway. The words were always the same. "You're late. I waited. I screamed for you." Then the dream would end in silence. The kind of silence that fills your lungs with something heavier than air. Min visited the city archives the next day. It was an old colonial building, the kind with flickering lights
and staff who looked at you like your questions were inconveniences. She asked for the tenant records for Unit 7C. At first, the clerk refused. "That building?" he muttered. "Nothing good comes from those files." Min waited. Eventually, he returned with a yellowed folder sealed in plastic. She read the first page. The tenant, Chun T. Lei, age 31. Occupation, unknown. Registered as self-employed. No family contacts listed. No emergency number. Just a move-in date and a date of death. There was a police report attached. Basic details. Fire at 3:18 a.m. Found deceased, kneeling in the center of the apartment. Hands bound, mouth open. No sign of escape attempt. Cause of death? Unknown. Likely asphyxiation. But then she flipped to the last page. A handwritten note dated 2 days later. Her body was not at rest. Her mouth continued to move for 3 minutes after declared deceased. Not breathing, just moving, like it was finishing something. Min felt bile rise in her throat. She asked for any reports before Lei. The clerk hesitated again. There was one, from 1997, same unit, different tenant, a Catholic nun who lived alone. She was reported missing after neighbors heard chanting for 3 nights straight. When the landlord finally entered, the unit was empty. The mirrors were all covered. The windows had been painted shut from the inside. The nun was never found, but the room was full of candles burned down to their base, and one thing scrawled in charcoal on the wall. Her mouth is not hers anymore. Min returned home in silence. She locked every door, every window. She even taped the crack in the floor as if that could hold it back. But the tape peeled itself away during the night. She watched it in real time. The air around it rippled like heat, and then she heard it. The sound of breathing from inside the floor. Not heavy, not threatening, just disappointed. The next day, Min received mail that wasn't hers. An envelope slid under her door. No stamp, no name. Inside was a single item, an old photograph. A woman standing on the 8th floor balcony, wearing a white dress, hair over her face. But it wasn't Lei. It was Min, or someone with Min's body, her posture, her clothes. The timestamp read 5 days ago, 3:17 a.m. Min dropped the photo. Her hands were shaking so violently she couldn't breathe. She ran to her mirror. She stared at her reflection. It blinked 1 second too late. She rushed to Mr. Bao, demanded the truth. Who was Lei? Why did she live there? What happened before her? He stared at her for a long time before finally speaking. "You think this is about a ghost? It's not. It's about a name." Min frowned. "What do you mean?" "Some spirits don't haunt places," Bao said quietly. "They haunt identities. They haunt the names we leave behind. If you let her in, she doesn't become a shadow in the dark." He looked up at her. "She becomes you." Min left without saying another word. She took the stairs. Every landing echoed with the memory of pacing footsteps. Every window reflected her face, except in one where she swore the reflection was still smiling after she passed. Back in her room, Min started seeing symbols, scratched into the condensation of her bathroom mirror, burned faintly into the wooden floor beneath her rug.
She photographed them, drew them out, reverse searched through forums, archives, even old folk ritual books. One symbol kept coming up: a mouth inside a circle, a vessel. It belonged to a class of Vietnamese Buddhist rituals called Mieng Guai, or mouth-binding rites, used in necromancy, mediumship, forbidden since the 1960s. The ritual allowed the living to borrow the voices of the dead, but it came with a cost. If the circle broke, if the vessel resisted, the voice could stay behind, could root itself in flesh, could speak on its own. Min woke the next morning to find a fresh crack in her ceiling. Not a natural one. It was shaped like a symbol, like a mouth. She no longer trusted her own voice. She recorded herself reading a poem aloud. When she played it back, it wasn't her voice. It was a rasp, something old, and it laughed. Min screamed, threw the phone against the wall. It didn't break. The recording kept playing. You brought me here. You answered the knock. Now you wear the door. She stopped eating, stopped answering messages. Her phone no longer showed time properly. The clock always paused at 3:17 a.m. She heard someone knock at her door that night. 3 soft taps. She didn't answer, but the door opened anyway. No one was there, just a mirror placed upright in the middle of the hallway, and on it, written in her handwriting, "You're not the tenant, you're the host." She screamed for hours. She begged for it to leave her alone. She tried burning incense, salt, prayers, but the whispers only grew clearer, and now they spoke in her voice, mocking her, repeating her thoughts before she could think them. She stopped trusting her mind. She stopped using her name. She looked in the mirror and said, "You are not Min," and her reflection smiled. "No, I'm Lei, and I'm home."
3:17 a.m. used to be just a number. Now it was a sentence. Each night, Min would count the minutes leading up to it like steps toward a fall. 3:10, 3:12, 3:15, and then that final stretch where everything in the room changed without changing. The shadows stretched longer. The light dimmed even though the bulb didn't flicker. The silence thickened like a wall closing in. And then, without fail, it would begin. The footsteps. They didn't come from below anymore. They came from inside the room. Back and forth, barefoot, always pacing just beyond her line of sight. She would turn, nothing. She would stare into the mirror, movement behind her. She tried filming it, but the recordings always deleted themselves by sunrise. Even screenshots disappeared. Only the time remained. 3:17 a.m. The moment the veil grew thin. Min marked it on the wall in chalk. Every time the hour came and went, she carved a mark. There were 17 tally marks by the end of the week. Each one matched a new symptom. Blacked out mirrors, photos on her phone that she didn't remember taking. Always of herself, always sleeping, always with a second face faintly in the corner. Waking up with ash on her fingers, salt in her mouth, and one morning a mouth-shaped bruise on her shoulder, like someone had whispered something into her skin hard enough to leave a mark. She visited a spiritualist in District 10, the kind of woman you only find through rumors, the kind with silk scarves, fingers full of rings, and an altar where every candle burned blue. The woman didn't ask Min's name. She simply looked into her eyes and said, "You opened it. didn't you?" Min's voice cracked. "I didn't mean to." The spiritualist lit a small bundle of herbs. "Tell me what you see when the pacing starts." Min hesitated. "Nothing, but I feel watched and heard, like I am no longer the one thinking my thoughts." The woman nodded. "That's not a haunting, that's an inheritance." Min felt cold. "She's replacing me?" "No," the woman whispered. "You are offering yourself." She gave Min a charm, a necklace woven from red string, salt crystal, and a scrap of burned parchment. "Wear this at 3:17 a.m. Sit still. Do not move. Do not speak, not even to yourself." Min nodded. But that night, when the hour came, the necklace burned hot against her chest and then snapped. The thread split on its own, falling to the floor, and the footsteps resumed. Slower now, closer. She shut her eyes. A whisper grazed her ear. "You shouldn't have tried to leave me behind." Min no longer trusted time. Her clock stopped at 3:17 even in daylight. Her calendar deleted itself. Her reminders rewrote with strange entries. "Pray. Don't walk. She hears your feet. Breathe quieter. Let her finish speaking." Her walls pulsed with moisture. Black mold shaped like mouths began to spread upward from the floorboards. She scrubbed it with bleach until her hands bled. The next morning, it was back, bigger. The mold spelled something in Vietnamese. "Ngủ chưa? Are you asleep?" She decided to confront it. At 3:17, she sat in the center of the room. No camera, no phone, no voice. Just her. And waited. This time the footsteps stopped before they started. The silence was worse. Then she felt it. A finger, running down her spine. She didn't move. Another finger traced her lips. Then a voice from just behind her. "You shouldn't have stayed quiet. You should have kept dreaming." She turned. There was no one, but her shadow on the wall had a second head. Min fled the apartment the next morning. She checked into a cheap hostel near Cholon, far away from the building. No forwarding address, no phone. She lay on a stiff mattress with a borrowed blanket and told herself it was over. She slept through the day, but at night, just as she began to doze, she heard it, the sound of pacing in the room above. She looked up at the ceiling and saw ash falling from the cracks. She ran back to the building, banged on Mr. Bao's door, told him she was losing her mind, that she needed to understand what Le had done. Bao looked tired, older than before. He sat her down. "Let me tell you what happened. Leb wasn't just a tenant. She was the final vessel. She came from a bloodline of mediums. Her grandmother was a river walker. Her mother spoke with the drowned. Le tried to close it, to seal it forever. But the thing she bound used her mouth to call for help." Min stared at him. "Why my apartment?" "Because the seal cracked, and your unit was built over what used to be the altar. You walk where she once prayed. You speak in the place her words were silenced." Min's throat tightened. "How do I stop it?" Bao's voice dropped. "You can't stop what's already been invited. You can only give it something else to listen to." That night, Min placed her phone on the floor one last time. She spoke into the mic. "You want to speak? Use my voice, but leave my body." She hit record and left it overnight. In the morning, the file was intact. Only one sentence played back. "Already did. Now let me walk." The doorbell rang at 3:17 a.m. No one ever rang her bell. She opened the door and found a mirror leaning against the hallway wall. Her reflection stood inside. Same eyes, same skin, same body, but not blinking and smiling. Behind her,
Ming stopped speaking aloud, even to herself, because lately her voice didn't always return the same. Sometimes it came out cracked, hollow, like someone else was pushing the sound through her throat, like her mouth had become a tunnel and something older was whispering through it. So she began mouthing words instead of saying them. She wrote notes to herself instead of journaling. She used sign language, though no one was around to read it. But still, the voice spoke. In dreams, in reflections, in the silence beneath the floor. She began sleeping during the day. At night she stayed awake, not to watch for ghosts, but to keep herself from becoming one. Because every time she slept, she dreamed of being inside someone else's skin, wearing it like clothes. And every time she woke, the cracks in the floor were wider. The breath beneath the boards came faster, hungrier. One night, she found writing on the inside of her closet door, letters scratched faintly into the wood. It wasn't Vietnamese. It wasn't any language she knew, but somehow she could read it. The words said, "Let me finish what you interrupted." She didn't know what she had interrupted, but she knew now what she had become. Not a person, a conduit. She opened her laptop and searched deeper into the occult forums she had previously dismissed as fantasy. She found a thread buried on a site so old it barely loaded. The title read, "Voices Beneath the House, a thread for survivors of spirit channeling gone wrong." Most of the comments were nonsense, but one stood out, posted by someone with the username "Still Sleeps Here." It read, "If it speaks in your voice, you're not haunted, you're hollowed. If it paces, it's rehearsing. If it whispers beneath, it's almost ready. If it knows your name, it's already inside." Ming slammed the laptop shut, but the message echoed in her mind. Hollowed, rehearsing, ready, inside. The next evening, she felt her hand move on its own. It reached for the floorboard. Her fingers slid beneath the plank where the crack had widened. She didn't tell them to. They scratched, pulled. Something shifted beneath the wood, like breath rising through damp earth. She tore her hand back, but not before a splinter drove deep into her skin. She ran to the sink, washing the blood away. But the blood wasn't red, it was black, and it moved against the water, refusing to go down the drain. Ming bandaged her hand and stayed awake the rest of the night. The floor pulsed gently beneath her. She placed her ear to the boards. This time there was no pacing, only breathing. And then a whisper, faint, as if spoken through layers of wet cloth. "Not yet, not fully. You still resist." She whispered back, not out loud, but in her mind, "What do you want?" The reply came instantly. "To walk again, to speak without needing you, to become the one above." The next morning, Ming visited a used bookstore on Chonghengdao Street, a tiny place buried between hardware shops. The owner was old, barely looked at her, but when she asked about rituals of separation, his eyes flicked up. He didn't speak, just reached beneath the counter and handed her a thin, leather-bound book with no title. She opened to the first page, handwritten, ink smudged, but legible. "To break the mouth's binding, one must speak the dead's final words, backward,
alone, before dawn. Ming asked, trembling, "And what if I don't know the last words?" The man said nothing, but he pointed to the floor beneath her and whispered, "Then you'll learn them the hard way." That night, Ming set up candles, drew a circle in salt and thread, sat in the middle. She whispered backward every sentence she had spoken since moving in. "I'm only here for a few months. I needed somewhere quiet. It's too cold in here." She said them all in reverse. Her throat ached, her eyes blurred, and still the boards beneath her did not rest. The whisper came again. "Wrong words, wrong tongue, wrong vessel. Let me show you." The crack widened, and from it something rose. Not a face, a mouth, just a mouth. No eyes, no nose, just teeth, chapped lips, skin pulled tight. It spoke without sound, but Ming understood. It was her voice telling her she was done. She woke the next morning with blood in her mouth, but no wounds. The taste was thick, familiar. She spat it into the sink, and written in the steam on the mirror was a date: July 17th, 5 years ago. The day Led died. The day the fire came. The day the ritual was supposed to finish. Ming found an old video on her phone that she didn't remember recording. It showed her asleep on the floor. A shadow passed over her body, paused, then leaned down. The whisper was clear. "Finish it this time. Don't leave me halfway again." Ming grabbed a knife, not to hurt herself, to cut the floor open. She tore the boards apart one by one, frantic, weeping. Beneath them, blackened concrete. And drawn across the concrete was a ritual circle in ash. At its center, a mirror, cracked, burned, fused to the stone. Her own reflection stared back, but the eyes were not hers. And in her ears, not from the mirror, not from the floor, but inside her own skull, she heard the final words: "Let me walk, let me speak, let me become." She said them backward, then forward, then backward again. Nothing happened, but the breathing stopped. The floor went still for the first time in weeks, and she collapsed. But silence isn't peace. Silence is waiting. And that night, 3:17 a.m. came. No footsteps, no whisper, no voice, until she stood in the mirror, and her reflection smiled and said, "Thank you. Now sleep. It's my turn to walk."
It started with the ceiling, not the floor this time. Ming woke up to a faint tapping overhead. At first, she thought it was a neighbor, maybe someone upstairs rearranging furniture, or a child rolling a ball. But when she checked the building plan again, her stomach turned. There was no unit above hers. Her apartment was the top floor. The tapping returned the next night, louder, sharper, like fingernails dragging along plaster. Ming lay still in bed, heart thudding, listening to something move in circles above her head, pacing, scratching, whispering in patterns. It was exactly 3:17 a.m. again. The time never changed. but the direction of the haunting had. It was no longer trying to come up. Now, it was coming down. She stood on a chair the next morning and ran her fingers over the ceiling. The paint was chipped, dusty. Then her fingers brushed something deep, grooved. She grabbed a flashlight. What she saw made her legs buckle. Carved into the plaster, faint but deliberate, was a spiral. Not etched randomly, purposeful, ritualistic. And in the center of the spiral, a single word, scratched in jagged strokes. Wick. Reverse. The same word she'd seen again and again in her dreams, in the mirror fog, in the voices whispered from beneath. But now it was above her. Like something had twisted the very geometry of the haunting. Like it was no longer beneath her, it was surrounding her. The mirrors no longer reflected her movements. They lagged, delayed. She would turn her head and her reflection would follow a second too late. She covered every mirror in the apartment with black cloth and tape. It didn't help, because now even the windows reflected her face, and sometimes two faces, one of them always smiling. On the third night, she woke up to find red strings stretched from corner to corner across her ceiling, tied in patterns she didn't recognize. She hadn't placed them there. Each knot had a tiny object suspended from it, a nail, a tooth, a piece of burnt cloth, and dangling from the very center was a small mirror shard. Ming stared at it, frozen. She whispered softly, "What do you want from me?" And the shard spun on its string, slowly, rhythmically, like it understood, like it was considering her question. Then it stopped, pointed toward the floor. The crack in the floor had opened again, but this time it wasn't a crack, it was a hole. Ming collapsed. Her breath came fast, too fast. She crawled backwards into the hallway, and that's when she heard the scratching on the other side of the ceiling. Not inside the apartment, but above the building, the roof. Like someone or something was walking across the sky, trying to get in. She went to Mr. Bao's apartment again. He opened the door slowly. His eyes looked bloodshot, hollow. She didn't even ask this time. She just said, "It's coming from above now." He stared at her, then nodded. "The seal is breaking in both directions." "What seal?" He motioned her to sit. There was never just one haunting. There were two. One buried beneath the building, and one trapped in the air above it. He looked at the ceiling. Lei's ritual was meant to collapse both, to silence the voices in the earth and the sky. But she failed. And now the thing she tried to bind has found a new path. Ming trembled. "What is it?" Mr. Bao whispered. "Something that should not speak. Not with a voice, not with a mouth, not through you." He handed her a bundle of cloth. Inside was a small rusted key, the original key to 7C. "You have to go back. You have to finish it." Ming didn't ask how he had the key. She didn't ask how he knew what waited inside. She just took it and returned to the sealed door. Unit 7C. The hallway lights flickered as she approached. The door was still blackened, melted, warped. But when she slid the key into the lock, it turned, easily, too easily. The door opened, and cold air rushed out like breath held for years. Inside was darkness, not just absence of light, but a darkness that felt, thick, alive. She stepped inside. The apartment was a shrine of ash and silence. Black string crossed every corner,
Red handprints smeared the walls, candles burned without flame, and in the center of the room, a circle, drawn in salt, bone, and hair. At its center, a mirror, not cracked, not broken, whole, reflecting nothing. Ming stepped into the circle. The air snapped shut behind her. No more sound, no more building, just her. And then the mirror began to ripple. Not the surface, the frame. It pulsed like a throat, and from it a whisper came, the same one she'd heard for weeks, but now it came from all around her. You have the voice. You have the name. Now give me the body. Ming screamed, but no sound came out. Only laughter. Not hers. Not human. The ceiling in 7C began to crack. Not just a fracture, but a full split down the center. Black ash rained down, and through the opening, Ming saw something descending. Not a ghost, not a spirit, a shape, a mouth, so wide it had no beginning, so deep it had no end. It opened, and it spoke through her. Her mouth moved, her throat burned, her eyes filled with blood, and the voice said, I am not Lei, I am not Ming, I am what walks when the seal breaks. The mirror shattered. Ming collapsed, and when she woke, she was back in her apartment, alone. The ceiling bare, the floor sealed. No red string, no mouth, no whisper, just silence. And then the clock ticked forward. 3:16, 3:17. Footsteps began again, but not below, not above. This time, they were behind her.
Ming stopped using her name. It no longer fit right in her mouth. Each time she spoke it aloud, it sounded distant, echoing strangely, as if the syllables belonged to someone else. She tried writing it down, but her hand refused to finish the letters. Her journal, once filled with entries in neat, slanted handwriting, now only held symbols, circles, spirals, mouths. Sometimes she found full sentences written in ink she didn't own. They always began with the same phrase, "We are speaking through you." The mirrors stayed covered, but now the glass beneath the cloths vibrated at 3:17 a.m. every night, not rattling, breathing. Once she lifted the cloth just enough to peek and found not her reflection, but her body, standing, facing her. Same clothes, same face, but the eyes were completely black, and her mouth moved soundlessly, then smiled and whispered against the glass. Almost done. Ming began blacking out. She would lose time, wake up in different parts of the apartment, the closet, the bathtub, the balcony. One morning, she woke to find ash smeared on her forehead in the shape of an open eye. She no longer remembered cooking, but the stove had been used. She hadn't bought candles, but they lit themselves at night. She hadn't opened the door, but her welcome mat was soaked with muddy footprints. She checked her phone's step counter. Every night, between 3 and 4 a.m., she walked 1,112 steps inside her home, but she never remembered standing up.
Her dreams were no longer dreams. They were rituals. She knelt inside a circle of bone. She held a burning thread between her teeth. She spoke in reverse, while shadows without heads bowed around her. She woke up with soot on her tongue, sometimes blood. She once found a bowl beside her bed filled with black water and floating teeth. She flushed it, scrubbed her hands, cried. But the water came back the next night, clear at first, then dark. The whispers changed. They no longer came from the floor. They came from inside her walls, from the drain, from the keyhole. And they didn't whisper to her anymore. They whispered with her voice, repeating her thoughts before she thought them, finishing her sentences, mocking her memories, echoing her grief like a twisted lullaby. She visited the temple again. The monk who had once warned her was gone. The incense was cold. The altar was cracked. She left a red envelope with coins and salt. But when she turned to go, she saw her own photo on the offering plate, burning. No one else was in the temple. Ming tried to call a friend, her last friend, someone she hadn't spoken to in months. She needed a voice that reminded her of who she used to be. But the voice that answered wasn't familiar. It spoke slowly, heavily. Ming? Yes, it's me. Long silence. Then, that's not your name anymore. The line went dead. Her phone screen melted into black, and from its speaker, her voice whispered back, "We told you not to leave us unfinished." That night, the walls bled. It wasn't paint. It wasn't a dream. Thick streaks ran from the corners of the ceiling down to the floor, staining the wood in long vertical lines, like tears from the building itself. She tried to wipe it away, but the cloth dissolved in her hand. She took a photo, but the photo showed something different. Her, standing in the hallway, facing the wall, with her back to the camera, and behind her a second figure, barefoot, mouth wide open, no face, just a mouth. The possession wasn't sudden. It was slow, patient, like a hand resting on her shoulder, waiting for her to breathe out, so it could breathe in. She felt it move through her fingertips first, writing things without her control. Then her eyes, seeing shadows that didn't belong in her field of vision. Then her voice. She started humming at night, low, strange tones. She'd wake up to find her throat sore, her lips cracked. One day, she opened her eyes in the mirror, and she was already smiling. Ming tried to leave. She packed a bag, tried to walk out the front door, but the knob wouldn't turn. She screamed, threw open the windows, but all she saw was black water stretching for miles. No street, no city, just endless rippling black, reflecting her apartment like it was floating in nothing. She turned around, and the hallway was gone. Only a long corridor of mirrors remained, each one showing her walking, 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 endlessly, alone. Then came the knock. Not on the door, on her mirror. Soft, 3 times. She stood frozen. Then a voice, her voice, whispered through the glass.
The mouth is open. Let us finish the name. Let us wear you completely. She stood at the center of her apartment. The air was thick. Salt formed circles around her feet without her moving. Ash fell from the ceiling in slow, steady flakes. The clock struck 3:17 a.m. No footsteps this time, only silence. And then her mouth moved, not because she willed it, but because something else had claimed it, and from her lips came the voice, not her own, something older, something cracked. I am what remains when the living forget to close the door. I am what sleeps beneath the skin. I am almost free. Then silence. Her mouth stopped. Her body collapsed. She woke with every mirror in the apartment shattered, and on each shard was a word. Not Ming, not Lei, but a name she didn't recognize, a name she couldn't pronounce, but her mouth whispered it anyway, and her voice sounded relieved.
It began with the boards shifting. Min watched them move, not dramatically, just the subtlest curl at the edges, like old wood swelling in humidity. But her apartment was dry, freezing cold, silent as the dead. Still, the boards rippled beneath her feet. They pulsed like a second heartbeat, the one beneath her own. By then, Min no longer slept. She sat on the floor for hours, staring at the place where the crack had once been, now sealed again, but wrong. The lines didn't match, the wood grain was different, and sometimes she heard breath leaking through, as though something exhaled under the floorboards, just waiting for her to inhale it. She moved her furniture away from the center of the room, pulled up the rug, scraped at the edges of the plank with a fork. It peeled away like wet bark. Beneath the wood was not subfloor. It was charcoal, black, brittle, burnt. Min scraped deeper. Ash flaked up into her face, coating her lips with something bitter and metallic. She dug faster. By nightfall, she had exposed a hidden crawl space, just large enough to slide through. The air rising from it was colder than ice, and it smelled like something had wept there for decades. She left her apartment door wide open, just in case she had to crawl out screaming. Then she lowered herself into the hole. It was darker than she expected. Not pitch black, but red dark. The kind of dark that feels thick, almost wet. Her knees landed in soot. Her hands trembled as they touched the walls, rough, carved with something deep. Symbols, spirals, crosses, mouths within mouths. And then, on the far wall, a face. Not drawn, carved, human-sized. Hollow eyes, open mouth. No nose, no ears, just a gaping expression of agony or ecstasy. She leaned closer. Inside the mouth, teeth. Real ones, human, embedded in the stone. She tried to back away, but her hand hit something behind her. Another wall? No. Another face. She turned slowly. She was surrounded. Dozens of faces carved into stone, all open-mouthed, all ringed with black string and dried flowers. Some had mirrors placed where the eyes should be. The room wasn't a crawl space. It was a burial cell, a shrine, a prison. And in the center, something stirred.
She moved toward the middle, a raised platform of bone and cloth. Candles melted into a ring around it, burnt offerings scattered in the dust, bones, hair, teeth, small statues of mouths with tongues missing. And resting at the center, a body. Not fresh, not skeletal, something in between, shrunken, blackened, bound in red thread, and a mask over the face, white, no features, just a mouth painted in red ink, wide, laughing. As Min stepped closer, the mask cracked. Hairline fractures spread outward. Then she heard it, from the corpse, from the mouth, from below the wood. Welcome home. The body sat up, not violently, calmly, the way a host rises to greet a guest. Min couldn't scream, couldn't speak, her throat closed in reverence or fear. The corpse lifted one arm, bone thin and wrapped in charms, and pointed at her. Then whispered, "We were not finished." The ritual had never ended. That was the truth. Lit had begun it, tried to seal the voice beneath, but something had gone wrong. She had died mid-chant, and her body had remained here, waiting, preserved by unfinished magic. And now Min had returned, not by accident, not by possession, but by design. She had been called, pulled, carved into the story long before she ever set foot in Unit 8C. She dropped to her knees. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with ash. She didn't want to finish what Lit started. She didn't want to belong to something ancient. But her hands moved anyway. They reached for the mask, lifted it slowly, and beneath it, her own face. Eyes closed, mouth slightly parted, breathing. She screamed. The sound shattered nothing, but it echoed through every carved mouth in the chamber, and the walls began to chant back. A dozen voices, then 100, all whispering, "Let her speak, let her finish, let her walk." Min crawled out of the pit, coughing. She slammed a table over the hole, pushed her bed across it, stacked books, chairs, shelves, anything she could find. But the air in the apartment had changed. It was no longer just haunted, it was inhabited. That night, she didn't walk. The footsteps came without her. The pacing resumed, in the ceiling, in the floor, in the hallway. Her phone lit up on its own. The calendar app opened. A date flashed. Tomorrow, 3:17 a.m. And beneath it, a note. Final opening. Do not resist. She tried to delete it. The app reinstalled itself. She took sleeping pills, taped her eyes shut, tried to bury herself beneath blankets and noise and light. But none of it mattered, because at 3:17 a.m. she stood up, eyes still taped, mouth moving, and whispered, "Below the wood, we made a promise. Now we come to collect." The next morning, Min's furniture was rearranged, her salt lines broken, candles lit, and a path cleared directly to the sealed hole in her floor. A single word burned into the wood beside it. Open.
Min spoke again for the first time in 3 days. But the voice that came out of her throat wasn't her own. It was deeper, slower, too even. The words felt like they came from the back of her skull, as if she were simply the tunnel they passed through. She whispered her own name. Min. And something inside laughed. Not out loud, just inside.
a quiet rattle behind her ribs. She tried to test it, held up her phone, hit record, spoke a simple sentence. Today is Thursday. I am men. I am fine. Then she hit play and heard, "We are awake. We are walking. You are not alone." She dropped the phone, backed away from it like it had bitten her. The recording kept playing, even after she'd closed the app, even after she turned the screen off. The only way to stop it was to smash the phone completely. And even then, her speakers hummed for the next hour. Her coworkers texted. They hadn't heard from her. They said she'd missed 3 shifts. But Min remembered going. She remembered talking to them. She remembered the conversations. But her phone showed no calls. Her work badge was missing. And when she tried logging into her email, her password no longer worked. It had been changed by her, or someone using her face. She visited the security guard again, the one who had let her see the CCTV before. He barely looked up from his tea when she asked to check the footage, just pointed to the monitor and said, "You won't like what you see." She rewound to 3:17 a.m. the night before. There she was, standing in front of her door, wearing her clothes, head tilted. But her face was missing, just blurred static, like the feed had been corrupted only where her features should have been. Then she watched herself open her door, step inside. But a moment later, she reappeared in the hallway, still standing there, still staring. 2 of her, same posture, different presences. The guard sipped his tea. "That happens sometimes," he said, "when something doesn't want to be alone anymore." Back in her apartment, mirrors were pointless. She'd already smashed most of them. The few that remained were covered. But sometimes even the windows reflected her now, only not quite her. The reflection would move first, tilt its head a second early, mouth words that Min hadn't even thought yet. Sometimes it would smile. Other times it would just watch. She stopped looking altogether. The voice took over small things first. Min would reach for water, and her hand would knock it off the table instead. She would type something into a search bar, and the letters would spell something else. "Speak through me. I am the shape of silence. Your skin fits better now." Then her emails changed. She found drafts she didn't remember writing, to people she didn't know. Messages that read, "The vessel is ready. She no longer struggles. The door will open fully tomorrow." She tried to scream, but her voice came out garbled, like static underwater. One day, she stood in the middle of the room and said, "Stop using me!" Her mouth replied, "I'm not using you. I am you. You were the voice I needed to begin. Now you're the silence I'll leave behind." Min's neighbors began avoiding her. They didn't say anything, but doors closed faster when she passed. Elevator buttons lit without being touched, as if the building itself hurried them away from her. One child stared at her in the hallway and whispered to his mother, "That's the woman with the wrong face." She smiled too much. She smiled without stopping. At night, the laughter came. Not hers. but it used her mouth, low, measured, like it had learned how to laugh from watching people do it. The mouth never closed fully. Sometimes she would find herself standing at the foot of her bed, arms limp at her sides, grinning at nothing. Sometimes she would catch herself walking into the bathroom, flipping the light on, and whispering a chant she couldn't translate. Other times, she wouldn't remember anything at all. Just wake up in new clothes, with dirt on her feet and ash under her fingernails. One night, she wrote something on the wall in her own blood. She didn't remember doing it, didn't feel the cut on her palm. But when she woke up, the words were fresh and glistening. The voice fits. The vessel holds. We are nearly born. She tried to burn the apartment down, poured lighter fluid on the wooden floors, lit matches, screamed. But the fire wouldn't catch. The air felt too wet, like the apartment itself was swallowing flame before it could spread. She collapsed in the center of the room, shaking, whispering apologies to no one. And the room whispered back, "Too late. We are already walking." She blacked out. For how long, she didn't know. When she woke, there were footprints in the ceiling, black, charred, bare, walking in circles above her. And on the walls, photographs of her. But she hadn't taken them. Each one caught her mid-pose, head turned, mouth open, eyes unfocused. She stared at one photo closely. Her pupils weren't black, they were mirrors. And inside the reflections, there were faces, watching, waiting, smiling. She no longer questioned who was in control, because control was never the point. She was no longer Min, not entirely. She was a shape, a name worn thin, a mouth that moved when it was told to. And on the final night, at 3:17 a.m., her voice said clearly, "I am not the woman who moved into 8C. I am the one who stayed when the last one failed. And now I wear her better."
Min no longer lived in the apartment. She inhabited it, and it inhabited her. They were no longer separate. Not her and the building, not her and the room below, not her and the voice that paced, scratched, whispered, wore her smile. She began to sense the walls breathing. She began to feel the corners watching. And beneath her skin, something ancient shifted, as if her body had become its shrine. It started with the smell, not rot, not mold, iron, like the moment before rain, sharp, metallic, old. It bled up through the floorboards, through the vents, through the sockets. No matter how much she cleaned, it lingered, sour, thick, humid, like a ritual had already begun and her lungs were being seasoned for it. At 3:17 a.m., she woke in perfect stillness. The air was too quiet. Even the city outside had silenced. And then she heard it. Ropes tightening, not around her, but under her, stretching, pulling, a tension in the wood, a yearning from below. The mouth beneath the floor no longer whispered. It groaned, like it had grown teeth, like it was grinding them. In the center of her living room, a new mark appeared, burned into the wood. A ring, encircled by smaller rings, each marked by a symbol, some human, some not. And at the center, a hole, clean, round, not carved, opened. Something had dug up.
from underneath, from the sealed ritual chamber. But now it wasn't sealed. Now it was hungry. Min knelt at the edge, peered down into the dark. She didn't see a crawl space. She didn't see a floor. She saw a room, the room from her dreams, the unfinished ritual, the altar of ash and bone. But now it was alive, breathing, chanting, lit by unseen fire. And in the center of it, herself, standing, waiting, smiling. She staggered back, her body cold, her hands shaking. But something inside her was calm, too calm, like it had expected this moment, like it had been guiding her here from the beginning. The lights in her apartment went out, all at once, and then lit themselves again, but now they were red, deep, pulsing, as if her home had become a lung and it was exhaling through glass. She heard footsteps from the hallway, but no one knocked. Instead, her door slowly opened, and in walked nothing. A shadow, tall, thin. Its face was a smear. Its hands were mouths. Its feet made no sound. It circled the room like it remembered it, like it had been away for a long time, but this was still home. It reached for Min's face, and she didn't move. At that moment, her ceiling cracked. Not just a line, a collapse. Wood splintered, plaster rained down, and from above, a rope dropped, knotted in places, still damp, smelling of smoke. It hung there, perfectly still, and the voice from the hallway whispered, "The room below wants in, and the one above has agreed." Min was the in-between. She always had been. Not the first, not the last, just the latest. A vessel between ceiling and floor, between what was buried and what was bound, between the mouth and the echo. She walked to the hole. She stepped into the circle burned into her floor. The rope above her tightened, the ground beneath her groaned, and she spoke the final words. Not in Vietnamese, not in English, but in the tongue of those buried without names. A voice that hissed like ash and cracked like bone. "It is time. Come through. Speak freely." The mouth from below answered, not as sound, as wind, a sudden gale that poured up through the hole, thick with heat and breath and memory. The windows burst open, candles spun wildly, and then hands. Dozens, from the floor, from the walls, from inside the cracks of her own body, reaching, pulling, clawing toward the light. Min arched her back and screamed, but it wasn't a scream. It was chanting, low, guttural, beautiful. She wasn't crying, she was welcoming. The red lights pulsed faster, the room tilted, walls expanded outward, revealing more space than the apartment had ever had. A staircase grew from the hole, made of ash, descending endlessly, and one by one, figures began to climb up. Pale, voiceless, mouths sewn shut, eyes hollow. They looked at Min with reverence, then with hunger, then with recognition. Mr. Bao stood in the hallway, watching from afar. He held a lantern. He said nothing, only nodded, and whispered to the darkness beside him, "It's open again. We lost another," and turned away, and the hallway sealed behind him like a wound closing over. Min knelt in the center of the room. The rope above her swayed, the mouth beneath her breathed, and her voice, no longer hers, whispered the final invitation. "All are welcome, all who were buried, all who were forgotten, return." The floorboard snapped, the ceiling opened,
The air collapsed inward, and Min smiled, because the room below no longer wanted in. It already was.
The 13th night came quietly. No thunder, no wind, no warning. Just the kind of stillness that means something is watching, but doesn't need to hide anymore. The apartment no longer resembled the place Min moved into. Its corners bent unnaturally. The walls pulsed with breath. The light had turned a soft, unnatural red, the color of flames seen through flesh. And the hole in the floor, it had become a throat. Not a metaphor. It pulsed, it opened and closed, it breathed, and it was pawing her down. She no longer needed to eat. She no longer needed to sleep. She didn't feel tired. She didn't feel alive, only ready. Because on the 13th night, the ritual completes itself, with or without her. She stood before the mouth in the floor. The staircase carved from ash still spiraled downward, deeper than the building's foundations, deeper than logic should allow. But she no longer questioned how deep it went or how long it had waited. She stepped down, each footfall silent, each breath synchronized with the breathing of the walls. She no longer remembered what she used to be afraid of, only what she was meant to become. The staircase led to a chamber, not carved, grown. The walls were flesh, or something like it. They pulsed, shivered, dripped. And at the center, surrounded by dozens of watching figures, all pale, all mouthless, sat a throne, made of mirrors, all broken, all reflecting pieces of her. On the throne sat Lei, or what remained of her. Hair like ink, skin like wax, mouth sealed shut with black thread, hands resting in her lap like they'd never moved. She looked at Min. Min looked back, and something inside her opened. Lei's mouth moved, not physically, spiritually, and Min heard it, not through ears, but through her own voice. We were not enemies. We were twins. You lived above because I remained below. You were born so I could return. Min stepped forward. Why? Why me? Lei's eyes flickered. Because your voice never stopped calling. You were the echo I needed. You carried me without knowing. You gave me your name. Now give me your body. Min fell to her knees. Her hands reached upward, not willingly, not in surrender, but in ritual. The crowd of mouthless figures circled her, chanting in silence. One of them stepped forward, removed its mask, and beneath it, her own face. Min stared into her eyes, but her reflection didn't blink. Instead, it spoke. Let go. Be the mouth that never closes. Be the vessel that overflows. Let us speak the den. Let us rise. The ceiling of the chamber split. Light, not sunlight, but something older poured in, and with it, voices, thousands, layered, male, female, child, inhuman, all speaking in unison, calling to Min by name, not the name she was born with, but the name she had inherited, the last mouth. She screamed, but the sound did not leave her body. It echoed inward, bounced through her bones, and became laughter. Not cruel, not joyful, just final. Like a story ending exactly as it was always meant to. She looked at Lei. Lei nodded, and the thread across her lips unraveled. Her mouth opened, and Min disappeared.
not physically. She still stood there, still breathed, still blinked, but now the breath wasn't hers, the blinking wasn't hers, the voice wasn't hers. It was shared, and it spoke. We are whole. We are named. We are born again. The chamber trembled, the mirrored throne cracked, the figures bowed, and above, in the apartment where Min had once lived, every mirror shattered, every light turned black, every piece of furniture rearranged itself into a perfect circle, and in the center, a mouth burned into the floor, waiting for the next one.
Min woke up in her bed. The sun streamed through the window, soft and gold. The apartment was clean. The air smelled of lemon soap. The floorboards were unbroken. No hole, no ash, no mouths. Just quiet, just peace, just normal. She sat up slowly, expecting pain or the pull of something ancient. But her limbs were light, no voices in her head, no shadows pacing behind her thoughts, just silence. It should have felt like relief. It didn't. It felt like the pause before something speaks. She got dressed, washed her face, looked in the mirror, and for a moment she saw herself, truly herself. No delay, no duplicate, no wrong smile. But when she blinked, her reflection didn't. And when she walked away, it stayed. She left the apartment, took the elevator down, stepped outside. The city was loud, alive, familiar. Bikes buzzed by, vendors called out, steam rose from the sidewalks. Life moved on. Min stood in it, but didn't feel part of it, like she was watching a memory replayed from behind glass. She tried calling someone, anyone, but her phone had no contacts, no photos, no record she'd ever existed. She returned to the building that evening, approached the landlord's office. Bao looked up from his desk, paused. His face was calm, but something in his eyes trembled. "You're still here?" Min tilted her head. "I live in 8C. He stared at her, slowly shaking his head. "No. No one's lived there since the girl disappeared, the one who went missing 2 weeks ago." "Your name?" "Min." Bao flinched, just slightly, then stood and quietly locked the office door behind her. Min didn't ask questions. She didn't scream. She just turned and walked back to the elevator, pressed the button, waited in silence. But the display didn't light. The elevator stayed dark, like it no longer recognized her as a tenant or a person. She climbed the stairs, floor by floor. Each landing echoed too loudly under her feet. The lights above her flickered, but not in warning, more like in recognition. They knew who walked here now. She reached the 8th floor. The hallway was unchanged, except for the air. It was still, heavy, holding its breath. She stepped to her door. No burn marks, no symbols, just a brass number, 8C. She unlocked it, stepped inside, and froze. The furniture was different. The walls had new paint. The scent was strange. And on the floor in the center of the room, boxes, taped, labeled. Someone else had moved in. She stepped back into the hallway. Her hands trembled. She knocked on the door next to hers, 8D. A woman answered, mid-30s, friendly smile. Yes? Min tried to speak. Have you seen me before? The woman tilted her head. You just moved in, right? I heard someone pacing last night. Then she laughed awkwardly. Sorry, I don't mean to sound weird. I'm a light sleeper. Min's mouth dried. What time? The woman thought for a second. 3:17, on the dot. Min turned away, went back inside. The new tenant was already here, but she wasn't a stranger. Min had seen her before, in the mirror, in the photographs, in the chamber below. She had her face, her posture, her smile, but the smile was too perfect, too smooth, too well practiced. Min stood in the corner, unseen, unfelt, and the woman looked straight at her, without seeing her, then walked to the window and waved to no one. Min left the apartment, down the hallway. She stared at the door to 7C, still blackened, still sealed, still untouched. Except now, someone stood on the balcony. She ran to the stairwell window, looked down. Unit 7C's balcony had a figure on it, motionless, barefoot, wearing her old clothes, hair draped over the shoulders. And at exactly 3:17 a.m., the figure looked up, not at the sky, not at the moon, at her, Min, watching from above, and smiled. The reflection flipped, the haunting reversed. She was no longer the tenant. She was the one below, watching, pacing, whispering from behind the walls. Every creak in the floor, every tap on the window, her. Now she was the sound that made others pause, the voice that spoke back when no one else was there, the one who whispered, "Stop walking so loudly, you're waking me up."
The building breathed. Not loud, not obvious, but if you listened closely in the silence between midnight and morning, you could hear it. The walls shifting, the floor expanding, the ceiling sighing like lungs, as though the concrete itself remembered. And in those hours, no matter how much incense was burned, no matter how tightly the doors were locked, the building still carried the same truth. The hole never closes. Weeks passed. The neighbors whispered. The landlord prayed quietly in his office, and life went on, as it always did. But in Unit 8C, something changed. The room was bright again, the windows clean, the floor polished, the air smelling faintly of fresh paint and soap. No hole, no crack, no trace of the 13th night. At least, not at first glance. The landlord showed the unit to a young couple. They admired the light, the price, the view of the river. They asked nothing about the past. People rarely do. Bao's hands trembled as he held the keys. He told them gently, "It's an old building. Some nights the pipes make noise. Don't worry too much about it." They nodded, already imagining their furniture here, already planning dinners, already picturing sleep. Sleep. The one thing no tenant of 8C ever truly kept. That night, the couple moved in. They unpacked boxes, laughed, argued about where to place the bed. By midnight,
The apartment looked almost alive again, bright, warm, normal. At 2:30 a.m., they fell asleep, and at 3:17 a.m., the pacing began. At first, it was faint, a single footstep below, then another, dragging, measured, slow. The woman stirred. She whispered to a partner, "Do you hear that? Someone's awake downstairs." He muttered something about neighbors, about city noise, about sleep, and rolled over. But the pacing grew louder, closer. It reached beneath their bed. And then came the whisper, not faint, not distorted, perfectly clear. "Stop walking so loudly. You're waking me up." The woman bolted upright, her breath caught in her throat. The room was still, the lights off, the city outside alive with sound, but the apartment silent. She reached for her phone on the nightstand. It lit up on its own. The calendar opened, a single entry written in red, 13th night. No date, no year, just those words, and the phone powered off. The floor shifted, only slightly, a faint groan, like something beneath had stretched in its sleep. The woman leaned over the edge of the bed, stared down. For a moment, she swore she saw it, the faintest outline of a mouth in the wood grain. Not wide, not moving, just there, waiting. She blinked, and it was gone. The next morning, she brushed it off. The man laughed when she told him. He said she had dreamed it. Stress, new place, thin walls. But when she showered, the mirror fogged over, and written in the condensation was a word: open. The building returned to silence in the day, always in the day. But the truth had already stirred, the same truth Bao knew, the same truth Min had discovered, the same truth Le had died trying to seal. The hole never closes. It only waits for footsteps above, for voices willing to answer back, for someone desperate enough to stay. And every tenant learns the same thing in time. The unit is never empty. The tenant below never sleeps. And once the whisper comes for you, you never truly leave.